Good morning. We'd like to welcome you to another edition of the Sunday School Review. This week's Sunday School lesson is entitled Abraham Makes an Offering, or Abraham Makes a Sacrifice. And we are still in the book of Genesis, and we are talking about sacrifices and offerings that predates the Mosaic law. And this lesson here is a test of Abraham's faith. It is actually the ultimate test of Abraham's faith and his willingness to sacrifice his son Isaac to God. As I said, this is Abraham's ultimate test of faith. And we know that this is not the first test of Abraham's faith. The very first test of Abraham's faith was the call to leave his home and go to another part of the country. And we also know that Abraham did not haggle with God. Abraham obeyed God. And that was the first test of Abraham's faith. And he passed that test. So this lesson here is the ultimate test of Abraham's faith to his willingness to sacrifice his son Isaac to God. And we know in the end, Abraham passed that test as well. We have the first outline, God's test of Abraham's faith. That's the first outline. And the second outline is Abraham acts. And the third outline is God intervenes. And the lesson, I'm not sure if I told you where it was taken from, is taken from Genesis, the 22nd chapter, verses 1 through 14. And the first outline is God's test is verses 1 and 2 of the 22nd chapter. And the second outline is Abraham acts, that's verses 3 through 10 of the 22nd chapter. And the third outline is verses 11 through 14 of the 22nd chapter of Genesis. Let's get right into our lesson with the first outline. God tests, and it's again is God test of Abraham's faith. And we read in verse 1, it says, and it came to pass after these things that God did tempt Abraham or test Abraham and said unto him, Abraham, and he said, behold, here am I. And said unto him, Abraham, and he said, here am I. In other words, basically, Abraham said, I'm ready. I'm ready for the test. It's just like when you give a test in class, sometimes the student may say, well, I'm not ready for this test. But Abraham said, I'm ready. Here am I, I'm ready. And in our lesson today, we have two characters. The two main characters are, well, actually, two main characters. His name is Abraham and his son Isaac. So Abraham and Isaac. And the first we read, uh, and also just a little bit of background here. Uh, Abraham was 100 years old when Isaac was born, when his son Isaac was born. Now, and we're going to read in the lesson about verse 2. I'll just read that right now. And he said, take now thy son, thine only son, Isaac, whom thou lovest, and get thee into the land of Moriah, and offer him there for a burnt offering unto one upon one of the mountains which I will tell you. Okay. So this is a test to see whether he would trust. Let's go back to the first clause, thine only son. Now, we know, and we're not going to talk about it a lot, but that was not Abraham's first son. Abraham had another son, Ishmael. However, Ishmael was not the son of promise. So when we see here thy only son, we're talking about Isaac, because Isaac was the son of promise, okay, by Abraham and Sarah. Ishmael was not the son of promise. So that's why it's referring to thine only son, whom thy loveth. That's not saying that he didn't love Ishmael, but this was uh, given to the fact that we're talking about Isaac, which was the son of promise. Okay, uh, 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 so uh, so let's we read that in verse 2, that son of promise, take him to the land of Moriah and offer him there a burnt offering upon one of the mountains which I will show you of, and that is Mount Moriah. Okay, that's really the first outline is setting up the test, God's test. And as I said, this is not Abraham's first test, but this is the ultimate test of Abraham's faith. Okay, and this is one thing about tests and temptations or tasks is to develop character. It wasn't the thing to trick him up. This is not to trick Abraham up. A test, and our tests come not to trip us up, but to develop a stronger commitment and develop character. So let's go to our second outline, which is starts at verse 3 and go till 6. To 10, 3 to 10. And verse 3 says, Abraham rose up early in the morning and saddled his ass and took two of his young men with him and Isaac his son, and clave the wood for the burnt offering, and rose up and went upon the place which God had told him. Okay, so we don't see here. This was an unusual demand, clearly, to sacrifice your only son. That was an unusual demand. But Abraham did not question God, as in the first test. As I said, Abraham didn't question God then. And Abraham is not questioning God here. We don't see Abraham protesting. Uh, Abraham obeyed God. So it's a test of Abraham faith and obedience. Okay. We don't see Abraham didn't haggle with God. He didn't protest. He said, and rose up early in the morning and saddled his ass and took the young men and Isaac and the wood and everything. So even though this was an unusual demand, Abraham did not he did not waste any time. He rose up early in the morning, and he did it. He was obedient. Bottom line, he was obedient. Now let's go to verse 4. And on the third day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place afar off. Now, they say that the lesson tells us about 50 miles. The journey, about a 50-mile journey. So, and obviously it was, walking and on donkeys or whatever. So it wasn't like a 50-minute drive, okay? So it was a long haul, okay, given the method of transportation in that day. Okay, so it was a 50-mile journey, and the third day. So Abraham clearly, as I said, didn't waste any time. He didn't waste any time and carrying out the unusual request that God had proposed to him. Okay, so verse 5 says, and Abraham said unto his young men. Now, once they, like foretold, once they got to that area, that Mount Moriah area, he lifted up his eyes and saw the place afar off. Okay, he was a distant. So 5 says, he said unto the young man, abide here with the ass, and I and the lad will go yonder and worship and come again to you. Now, Abraham, now the young men, the servants, did not know the full details. Okay. The lad, which at this point is supposed that Isaac was a teenager. So he, as a teenager, he understood some things. He understood some things. We're going to see that in the next verse. So that being a teenager, he understood some things. He wasn't like a 2-year-old or a toddler. So he understood some things. Okay. And it says 5, I and the lad, meaning Isaac, the teenager, will go yonder and worship and will come again unto you. That is the faith that Abraham had. As I said, the young lad didn't know the full detail of what God had told his father, nor I'm sure that the young men that were traveling with him didn't know either. Only Abraham knew what he was commanded to do, that is, sacrifice his son. Okay, so that demonstrated faith on the part of Abraham. Said, we're going to go and we're going to come again unto you later. Now, in Hebrews, we go to the 11th chapter of Hebrews, can shed some light on this scenario, this situation that they're in right now. And first, we'll go to Hebrews 11th chapter, and we'll start at verse 17 of the 11th chapter of Hebrews. And it says, by faith, Abraham, when he was tried or tested, okay, offered up Isaac. This is what we're talking about today, the lad. And he, when he had, let's begin again. Where he was tried, offered up Isaac, and he that had received the promise offered his only begotten son. We talk about Isaac, of whom it was said that in Isaac shall thy seed be called. Now, this was okay. Basically, the promise was the promise to Abraham was that his descendants would be the promise seed, would be the promise. Okay, his descendants, his heirs would be become his promise seed nation. That is the nation of Israel. That's what it was talking about. And now he said, okay, you're going to take the promised son away from me. How is this thing is to be? Let's go back to verse chapter 11. It says, in verse 19, accounting that God is able to raise him up. When he said, when Abraham said, I and the lad is going to go and offer, and we're going to come back to you. Abraham knew what God told him. Well, how is he going to come back to you if he's dead? So Abraham, and we find that in like I said, in Hebrews, the 11th chapter. So Abraham was figuring, account that God was able to raise him up. So Abraham was thinking that if I kill him, God is going to bring him back to life, and we're going to come back to you. So Abraham had the faith, and we're going to see he was willing to go through with the act, but his faith was that if I kill him, if I sacrifice him, God is able to raise him back up. So he's confident that, yeah, we're going to come back. Yeah, I'm going to kill him, but God is going to raise him up. That's what verse 19 of Hebrews said. He said, accounting that God was able to raise him up even from the dead. Yes, I'm going to kill him, but God is going to raise him up. And from his, also he received him in figure, also a figure received him back. Okay, so Abraham had faith that even if I go through with this unusual act, that is of sacrificing my son Isaac, God is going to raise him back up, and we're going to come back to you. So that's why he said in verse 5 back of Genesis, and Abraham said to the young men, abide here with the ass, and I and the lad will go yonder and worship and come back again. Abraham, as I said, the only person knew of the plan was Abraham, not the lad. I mean, the lad had some understanding because, as I say, he was probably a teenager. And the next verse is going to shed some light on that as well. Okay, what is verse 6? And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it upon Isaac, okay, his son, and he took the fire in his hand and the knife, and they went both of them together. Okay, so this is what happened. And as again, this was a lad. He was a teenager. So he said, okay, and this verse 7 tells us, and Isaac spoke unto Abraham his father. As I said, this was not a toddler, this was a teenager. And Isaac spoke unto his father and said, Father, he said, here am I, okay, my son, okay, but this was Abraham when he said, here am I, my son. This is Abraham's voice. Here am I, my son. He said, Father, and Abraham said, here am I, my son. Okay. Behold, this is Isaac. Behold the fire and the wood. Okay, we see that. I understand. I understand about sacrifice. I've been with you before. Okay. But where is the lamb? Again, as I said, he wasn't a baby. He knew that they used to sacrifice a lamb or something. Okay. I see the wood, I see the fire, but where's the lamb? Where's the sacrifice? Where's the sacrifice for the burnt offering? I know that I know what happens. I know what happens. And in his mind, he didn't tell him. I mean, if Abraham would have told him, he said, well, you were the sacrifice. He said, what? I mean, that didn't happen, okay. According to, we don't see the record of that. But if he had been honest and said, well, you are the sacrifice. Uh and this is the next verse is key when we said, and Abraham said, my son. When Isaac said, where is the sacrifice? Where's the lamb for the burnt offering? Where's the sacrifice? In other words, under his breath, you are. Okay. But, and Abraham said, my son, God will provide himself for a lamb for burnt offering. So they both went, both of them together. Okay. So as I said, when I referred to Hebrews, the 11th chapter, starting at verse 17, it was by faith. It says, verse 17 again says, by faith, Abraham, when he was tried, when he was tested, he had faith to believe God. He didn't question that. He had faith to believe that God would either raise him back up and they're going to come back. But he said, God will make will provide the sacrifice. Okay. And they went on. I mean, at this point, uh, in probably Isaac's mind, okay, I get that, but oh yeah, God's going to provide the sacrifice. I mean, basically, he was saying, okay, like, what are you talking about? God going to provide. Okay, now let's go to verse 9. And this is uh, where we see Abraham faith in going forward in Abraham's intentions. And they came to the place where God had told him of, and Abraham built an altar there. They built the altar, laid the wood in order. Okay, that's good. Abraham said, that's cool. That's cool. And bound Isaac. And there it is. Wait a minute, what's going on here? And bound Isaac his son and laid him upon the altar. Okay, think about that. You know, when he put the wood, when he put the wood there and built the altar and put the wood, Isaac said, that's cool, that's cool. But he bound his son Isaac and laid him up on the altar. And Abraham stretched forth his hand and took the knife to slay him. We see here Abraham's clear intentions. Now, Abraham said, well, God is going to provide. And like, okay, you know, he's waiting on God to provide. So, and even if he had went through it, that's his faith. Even if he had went through with it and slaying his son, he took the knife in his hand and stretched forth his hand and drew it back to slay his son. His son was already on the altar. And I mean, the scripture is not clear about, you know, Isaac protesting and all that, because he bound him to the altar. Like I say, he was not a toddler. So, I mean, he had some idea of what was going on or what was about to happen. Okay, now the next outline, which is the third outline, says God intervened. Okay, and this outline, it demonstrates the fact that Abraham's faith and obedience is rewarded. So we know that he had faith and he was obedient. Like I said, he did not protest. Again, back in verse 3, he did not protest the unusual request of God. He obeyed God, as he did obey him when he was instructed to move from his to leave his home. Okay, he didn't protest there. Neither is he protesting here. Okay, so as he stretched forth his hand, that was verse 10, and in the third outline, God intervened. And the angel of the Lord, this is verse 11, and the angel of the Lord called unto him out of heaven and said, Abraham. And Abraham said, here am I. Okay, God intervened. God clearly see that Abraham has intentions to go through with the sacrifice. Okay, and the angel said unto him, and he said, and this is verse 12, and he said, lay not thine hands upon the lad, neither do anything unto him, for now I know. In other words, now I know that thou fears God. As I said, this is the ultimate test of Abraham's faith and obedience toward God. Okay, seeing that thou hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, for me. Again, as I said, this was not Abraham's firstborn son, but this was the son of promise. That is Isaac, not Ishmael. Isaac was the son of promise, that through his descendants, that is Isaac, would the nation of Israel come from. Okay, the son of Isaac, not the seed of Ishmael, but the seed of Isaac. Abraham, Isaac, and the third son, Jacob, and from Jacob we get Israel. Jacob's name was changed from Jacob to Israel. That's why we have the nation of Israel, the God's chosen people. So, in other words, the promise of him, and that was an unconditional promise to Abraham, that through your seed, the promised seed, Isaac, would the nation come from, the descendants of Abraham, through Isaac, not through Ishmael, through Isaac. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, would the nation, would his promised seed be. That's who the nation, his chosen people, will come from Isaac. Okay. And he made that promise to him, and Abraham said, wait a minute, if you kill Isaac, you're going to kill the promise. But Abraham said, I'm going to trust God, and God is going to provide. And we're going to see where that is. Okay, we're not allowed to. God intervenes, and we just read verse 12. And when we see, it says, for I know that thou fearest God, seeing that thou hast not withheld thy son, thine only son. In other words, Abraham was willing to give up his only son. When he drew back the knife, out of faith and obedience, God knew that his intentions was to carry it out. In other words, test passed. He passed that test. That test was passed when he showed his intentions to carry out that unusual demand. Okay, verse 13, and Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, him a ram caught in the thicket by his horn. And Abraham went unto the ram and offered him up for a burnt offering instead of his son. So the ram, in other words, God did provide. God provided as we call it, a ram in the bush. He provided a substitute for his son. God did provide. And let's read the last verse, which is verse 14. And Abraham called the name of that place Jehovah Jireh, which we know to mean the Lord will provide. When you say Jehovah Jireh, the Lord will provide. Abraham called the name of that place Jehovah Jireh, as it is said to this day, in the mount of the Lord it shall be seen, or it shall be provided. Okay, so Isaac is spared, and we see the ultimate test of Abraham's faith toward God. And the idea we can actually go into I guess a little bit further in our in Genesis here, which I believe is 22. Let's read maybe a couple of verses there, which I said that when I believe it's 19 of 22, we was in 22. This is 22 and 19, and this was when Abraham had returned from the altar or the sacrifice. And verse 19 says, so Abraham returned unto his men. In other words, this is when, because Abraham said that we're going to come back, Okay, Abraham returned to his men, and they rose up and went together to Beersheba, and Abraham dwelt at Beersheba. So this was the aftermath of what happened. Now, the idea, I think, is chapters 24 and 25. Now, in chapter 24, I just briefly talk about that. In chapter 24, it talks about it shows the relationship that Abraham and Isaac had going forward. And in chapter 25 of Genesis, it talked about the death of Abraham, and it mentions that Isaac, which was his son, obviously, and Ishmael, which was his firstborn son, but was not the son of promise. They buried him. So the point I'm making is that even though, as I said, Isaac was a teenager, and because I saw some clip somewhere where what was the relationship with with Isaac and the father? In other words, after you tried to kill me, okay, what was the relationship like? And from all indications that they had a good relationship. Okay, Isaac did not hold a grudge, given the fact that, as I said, because Isaac was not a baby, so he was more like a teenager. So I remember what you tried to kill me. So, but uh, from all indications, Isaac and his father Abraham had a good relationship with with each other, because someone had mentioned in verse 19, when they came back, because he said, I and the son come back. They didn't mention the son. He said, and Abraham returned unto his young men. And it didn't say Abraham and the boy. So, I mean, I saw some speculation that maybe Isaac ran away, but in all indications, they had a good relationship with each other. And Isaac did not hold a grudge against his father for what he had done. But so that's it. I mean, we can't make anything out of that. But I just want to cover that. But this was a test. This was the ultimate test of Abraham's faith and obedience toward God. And Abraham passed the test of faith and obedience towards God. And again, last point is that the test or the temptation doesn't come to break us, it comes to develop a character. It developed more of a commitment to God than before. Okay, that's what tests and temptation come, is to strengthen our commitment towards God, and to also increase our faith in God provision, because he said God will provide, and God indeed did provide a substitute for his cycle for Isaac, the sacrifice. And that's our lesson today. Abraham makes an offering or a sacrifice to God. We'd like to thank you for watching. We ask you to join us next week for another edition of the Sunday School Review. Thank you.